Welcome to a dark dive into the world of serial killers. Get ready for a journey through the most disturbed minds and most heinous crimes ever committed. In this video, we explore the cases of some of the most horrific serial killers in history, whose actions left an indelible mark on society. Serial killers are individuals who commit a series of murders, usually with a specific pattern and motivated by psychological compulsions. These criminals often have characteristics in common, such as a lack of empathy, manipulation, and the ability to mask their true nature under a facade of normality. They may seem like ordinary people in the eyes of society, which makes their actions even more shocking and frightening. The phenomenon of serial killers is the subject of intense study by psychologists, criminologists and professionals in related fields, in an attempt to understand what motivates these individuals to commit such heinous crimes. Factors such as childhood trauma, mental disorders and traumatic experiences can contribute to the development of these criminal tendencies. Harold Shipman was a British doctor who became one of the world's most notorious serial killers, becoming known as the Doctor of Death. He was born in 1946 and worked as a general practitioner in West Yorkshire, England. During his career, Shipman has earned the trust of his community, being seen as a respectable professional dedicated to the care of his patients. However, behind this facade, Shipman was committing terrible crimes. Between 1975 and 1998, he took the lives of at least 215 people, most of them elderly and vulnerable. His main way of killing was through the administration of lethal doses of drugs, especially morphine and diamorphine, under the false justification of relieving the pain of his terminal patients. What makes Shipman's crimes even more disturbing is the fact that he took advantage of his position of trust as a doctor to manipulate circumstances and cover up his crimes. He falsified medical records, forged wills, and deceived victims' families into believing that their loved ones' deaths were the result of natural causes. Harold Shipman's case shocked the world and led to a thorough investigation that resulted in his arrest and conviction. In 2000, he was found guilty of 15 murders, but it is estimated that the real number of his victims could be in the hundreds. Shipman was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His story raised important questions about medical ethics, patient safety, and systems of oversight and regulation in healthcare. The Shipman case served as a wake-up call to the need for vigilance and strict control over healthcare professionals, in order to prevent abuses of power and protect the most vulnerable in society. Luis Garavito, known as the Monstro de la BTI, is one of the most sinister serial killers in history, leaving a trail of terror and death wherever he went. Born in Colombia in 1957, Garavito became known for his heinous crimes, especially against children and teenagers. Between 1992 and 1999, Garavito committed a series of brutal murders, taking the lives of at least 193 people. However, it is estimated that the real number of his victims could exceed 300, given the extent of his brutality and the scope of his actions. Garavito's modus operandi was extremely disturbing. He disguised himself as various professions, such as a priest, farmer, beggar, street vendor and even a teacher, to attract his victims. Using gifts, money, sweets or job offers, he managed to gain the trust of children and preteens before attacking them. In addition to taking the lives of his victims, Garavito also committed a series of other crimes, including sexual abuse and mutilation. His cruelty and lack of compassion shocked even the most experienced investigators, who encountered scenes of indescribable horror during the investigation of his crimes. In 1999, Colombian police finally managed to arrest Garavito, ending his series of atrocities. He confessed to 190 victims, but authorities believe the real number could be even higher. Garavito was sentenced to 1,853 years in prison, the longest in Colombian history. Pedro Alonso Lopez, known as the Monster of the Andes, is one of the most infamous serial killers in history, whose crimes shook Latin America. Born in Colombia in 1948, Lopez became known for his horrific acts against girls and young women in the Andes region. Over a period of approximately 10 years, between 1969 and 1979, Lopez allegedly took the lives of at least 110 victims. However, authorities believe the true number of his victims could be much higher, possibly exceeding 350. His crimes were especially shocking due to their brutality and the vulnerability of his victims. Lopez earned the nickname Monster of the Andes due to his ability to move easily through the mountains and remote areas where he found his victims. His main targets were girls between the ages of 8 and 12, whom he approached with false promises or subterfuge before committing his heinous crimes. After being captured by authorities, Lopez confessed to his crimes and led police to the graves of 53 of his victims in Ecuador. However, despite his confession, Lopez was sentenced to just 16 years in prison in Ecuador. In 1998, he was deported to Colombia, where he was judged insane and held in a psychiatric institution. Gary Ridgway, known as the Green River Killer, is one of the most notorious serial killers in United States history. Born in 1949 in Salt Lake City, Utah, Ridgway grew up in a troubled family where he was the victim of emotional abuse by his mother. From a young age, Ridgway showed signs of disturbing behavior, such as cruelty to animals and difficulty socializing. In the 1980s, Ridgway began a series of brutal murders, targeting young, vulnerable women in the Seattle, Washington area. His modus operandi involved strangling victims to death and then dumping the bodies in isolated areas along the Green River, earning him the nickname Green River Killer. The investigation into Ridgway's crimes was one of the longest and most complex in U.S. criminal history. For years, police collected evidence, interviewed witnesses and analyzed clues in search of the serial killer. Ridgway was arrested in 2001 after a DNA match confirmed his connection to the crimes. In exchange for a plea bargain, Ridgway confessed to murdering 48 women, although it is believed that the real number of his victims could be much higher. He was sentenced to 48 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Andrei Chikatilo, also known as the Butcher of Rostov or the Red Ripper, was one of the most brutal serial killers in Russian history. He was born in 1936 in Ukraine, amid the horrors of World War II and the famine that was ravaging the region at the time. From a young age, Chikatilo showed signs of sexual and psychological disorders, which led him to a life marked by failures and difficulties. Chikatilo began his murder spree in 1978, targeting children, teenagers and women in the Rostov-on-Don region. His modus operandi involved luring his victims to isolated areas, where he brutally attacked them, often mutilating their bodies in horrific ways. For more than a decade, Chikatilo managed to evade the police, leaving a trail of terror and death wherever he went. However, in 1990 he was finally captured by Russian authorities after a long and intense investigation. During his trial, Chikatilo was found guilty of more than 50 murders, although it is believed that the real number of his victims could be much higher. He was sentenced to death and executed in 1994. Andrei Chikatilo's heinous crimes shocked not only Russia, but the entire world, and his story continues to be studied by psychologists and criminologists seeking to understand the reasons behind his terrible journey of violence and destruction. These are just a few examples of the world's most terrifying serial killers. It is important to be aware and be careful who we trust. If you liked this video and want more content like this, don't forget to share it with your friends and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos.